Right now, I'd love to bring in someone who is a brilliant political consultant, knows Congress, he knows the legislature, he knows this political world so well, and he can give us some sense of magnetic north right now. How about it for Richard Greene, the Civics Dean? Sir, hello.
Hey, Mark.
Tell me what you make of all of this, because I saw a post from you that was sobering, and it was essentially, don't sweat this in a way, because the real sweat is everything, meaning what's coming behind this. You could veto these picks, none of them could go through, and the clown car of picks behind these picks is so toxic that it'll make you forget these picks.
Yeah, can I just say, I find it hilarious that we're doing major network news pieces because someone in politics actually paid someone to have sex, when a plurality of Americans voted for someone who paid someone to have sex while his wife was pregnant with his child, all of that. So on a more
It's not someone,
moral
it's
level,
a 17-year-old. Okay, so that's the difference, I think.
I understand, but also it's, oh my God, he's joking about taking erectile dysfunction drugs and whatever. Listen, here's the bottom line. Donald Trump, just like we did with Bobby Kennedy, forcing him in a hostage video to eat McDonald's on the airplane, his plan, as all dictators have as their plan, is to denigrate and humiliate everybody else and to assert absolute dominance over everyone. And part of the game for Donald Trump, having been a president for 4 years, is, hey, I learned my lessons. I'm going to now be 100% dominant. If I want Matt Gaetz to be Attorney General, if I want Vladimir Putin to be Secretary of State, I'm going to frickin' do it. And I think the point that you're asking me to share is there are actually two ways that we can't do anything about it. So I mentioned that Donald Trump would become a dictator, could become a dictator, will become a dictator, not on day one, but in the first 15 seconds. And it was through the appointment of the single most important person to establish his fascistic authoritarianism, which is the the attorney general. So even if for some reason he backs off on Matt Gaetz and he doesn't get the confirmation and he gives up, guess who's hiding in the wings? One acting attorney general as bad as Matt Gaetz or worse, after another acting attorney general as bad as Matt Gaetz or worse. And that is true for Tulsi Gabbard. That's true for everybody else. That is what America did on November 5th. They gave the keys to the kingdom to someone who is absolutely not going to abide by the checks and balances. So the TikTok that I just did that now has, over 60,000 views in just a couple hours, at Civics Dean, talks about a scenario, which is the Putin scenario, which is the demagogue dictator fascist playbook. So let's say Donald Trump puts in Matt Gaetz, says, you know what, screw all of you. Matt Gaetz is my attorney general. And they're going, oh my God, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that. And so they take Donald Trump to court. And the courts, from the district court to the circuit court to the Supreme Court, say, Donald Trump, you cannot do that. You have to abide by the Constitution. You have to have the Senate play their role of advice and consent. He goes, the hell with you. Go F yourself. Because the only way to enforce the Constitution, the only way to enforce what Congress does, the only way to enforce what the judiciary does, including the Supreme Court, is through the Attorney General and the Justice Department. The Justice Department, as part of the executive branch, enforces everything. And if they choose not to, it doesn't happen.
It's so sobering because it is so believable. It's so plausible.
Of course, that's what Steve Bannon has been saying since 2015. He wants to blow everything up. And they found the guy who is willing to do it. And I honestly, Mark, I don't know other than demanding the counting of paper ballots in swing states to absolutely prove that Donald Trump played fair and square with this election and Elon Musk and Vladimir Putin played fair and square with this election. Other than that, I don't know how he stopped this for the next 4 years.
Well, as you know, we're going to do a little something on this later in the hour. I believe that there should be a recounting of votes, and I'd love to just at least sleep well at night knowing that the nation let me down, as opposed to the nation was let down by the system and those
I love that.
manipulating it. But I want to and we can double back to that. But I wonder if you can just go to the if we can right now just focus on what you're speaking of. You can have your appointment as president even without a Senate confirmation. That is to say, someone can serve in the attorney generalship, let's say in this instance of Gates, for up to a 2-year term, I think, without any kind of Senate confirmation. Isn't that right?
Well, there are a couple ways to do it. One is a recess appointment, which means if the Senate is or the Congress is on recess for a certain amount of time, because, hey, we need people to fill positions, sure, go ahead, right? There's that, and that's a certain period of time. But also there are acting cabinet officers because we
Exactly.
need someone to run the Justice Department.
So couldn't
And
he appoint Gates to that point, just to the latter point? Couldn't he appoint Gates as an acting attorney general?
there are certain requirements for that, but listen, there is no shortage of sycophants who, as we saw in the Attorney General's office, when he was in for the first time, who are willing to line up to be able to do exactly and only what Donald Trump wants them to do. So it really doesn't matter whether it's Matt Gaetz or anybody else who then would surrender the Attorney General position over to the president. And Joe Biden, because he's an institutionalist, has been incredibly clear. Whatever Merrick Garland does or doesn't do, and Merrick Garland, the worst attorney general in modern history, we've got to be fine with that because that is an independent department. So Donald Trump is breaking that 100%. By the way, I just want to say on that last point, people are shocked when they hear that we have not counted one paper ballot in all of the 7 swing states. And if we're not going to count paper ballots, why the hell do we have them?
Thank you. Okay, so now on to that point. So, I was saying before you got here that it seems at least conceivable to me, okay, like I'll take a meeting on the fact that there might have been funny business, and here's why. First of all, there are legitimate, specific reasons that we're going to get to a little bit later in the hour. There are a lot of these bullet ballots that went into, for example, Maricopa. That's when somebody votes for just president. Okay, they don't vote for anything on down ballot. That's called a bullet ballot, and there are a lot of them, like way more than
Way
there
more.
would. Yeah, way more than there would be that you'd find normally or in any past election. Okay, so that first of all, that's a red flag. You can see prima facie evidence of that, but. Just the notion that Donald Trump, who has cheated pretty much at everything he's ever done, and Musk, who has similarly cheated at everything he's ever done, would let this election that Musk is actually connected to through Starlink go by without any plan to try to manipulate anything, that strains credulity, okay? So I'm ready to, but again, I don't know if that's enough to get them to ask for a recount, but I think the only person who can ask for a recount is Kamala Harris, isn't that right?
Yeah, and the deadline for asking for a recount in 2 of the swing states, Nevada and Wisconsin, is tomorrow.
And why do Democrats and Kamala Harris leading that parade of Democrats roll over for what they explained during the campaign was the rise of despotism and fascism in a Trump administration?
I mean, why would Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski run down to Mar-a-Lago?
Thank you.
Mark, honestly, man, I'm embarrassed and ashamed of my party. Jon Stewart did something on this last night. I think we are weak. And, they're playing with AR-15s, and we're playing with plastic toy guns. I mean,
Yeah.
not that I'm advocating violence, but I'm talking about that metaphorically. I put this out to a number of people, and the reaction is, well, we're not like them. We're better than them. We're going to sound like them if we contest an election. I'm not saying we should contest an election. I say we are about to hand over the reins to a true fascist to the core, not my words, but the top military officer in the United States, without actually counting the ballots and ensuring that, to your point, a man who has never played by the rules, who has always cheated, who has teamed up with another man who is off his rocker, who happens to have the greatest technology in the world, including AI, who has teamed up with Vladimir Putin, that we're going to somehow give all of those guys the benefit of the doubt. Listen, in 2000, we were all upset when the Supreme Court stopped the counting of the votes in Florida. My point is, let's just count the votes in the most secure way that we can. There are some red flags, as you've said. And why do we have paper ballots if we're not going to count them?
So, Tony, I hadn't expected to do this, but because we have Richard here, I'd love to just run that one piece of video. Now, this is a guy who I will get on this show probably, but his timely comments and sort of the how-to with Musk involved, he explained so well to Tom Hartman yesterday. Do you have that? And I thought that, I think it was yesterday, maybe it's a couple days ago, but this guy, Stephen Spoonemore, is someone who with a real tech expertise, and you'll hear
I know him.
Yeah, you do know him? Yeah, it doesn't
I
surprise
do know.
me. Yeah. So he starts with the bullet ballots that we talked about, but he'll explain, and this is the key, and we haven't touched on it yet. The key is that Musk had voter information through the petitions that he was circulating, through the ways in which he was registering voters in those swing states. He had voter information. When you add that to a desire to manipulate an outcome, you end up with this. Go ahead, Tony. Roll a little bit of this.
It's called a bullet ballot.
Right. And typically, the ones we're talking about here are people who just voted for Trump.
Correct, except that I'm increasingly thinking in a lot of cases the bullet ballot isn't there. The hack could have unfolded two ways. One, the e-poll books, which are all networked, all online, statewide, and it turns out most of them had very easy access for Mr. Musk because they're also were being backed up across Starlink. Have to be checked that a voter went there. Well, okay, there's two theories. One, toward the end of the day, they have great voter profiling on everybody. Musk had his lottery and built this list of people who had pledged to vote for Trump. They know who's actually voted because the poll book data is in front of them. So they can very accurately project what the outcome of the state was going to be and say, we're about 30,000 votes short. Great. So you check the box on 30,000 lottery pledged Trump voters. And then, provided you have a hack in the tabulator, you add 30,000 votes in the matching precincts of those tabulators. It is a pretty sophisticated attack. And I tell people, they say that sounds, and some people think it's nuts, but I have actually run operations larger than that, where we have infiltrated hundreds of credit card machines on behalf of the company that wants us to do so. The credit card machine is doing its proper job, just like the e-poll book and the tabulator were, but it's also sending out additional data that we are hoping is stolen by gangs, that we are tracking that data to find them. And we've done this in the numbers of hundreds. Right. So here you have a perfectly functional machine that's also doing additional and nefarious activity underneath it.
Okay, that's good. Thank you, Tony. But you see how basically what he's saying is, and this is why you want that paper ballot vote counted. Again, I'm not signing on to this necessarily, but he's saying the paper ballots don't exist. It was done through the information that you could then match up with voters and put through electronic bullet ballots, essentially.
And honestly, we could do a sample run to test the electronic votes compared to the paper votes with some mathematical formula. Let me just say, I actually with Stephen Spoonermore,
You
a
agree with
friend of
him? You say?
mine
Yeah, yeah.
who
Oh,
20 years ago was an award-winning producer at ABC News. She was doing a deep investigative piece on electronic voting machines. Stephen Spoonermore was one of the people we interviewed, and I was incredibly impressed with him. He's a total nerd, a real genius, a lifelong Republican, but he's not alone. There were a group of 8 computer scientists that also put out a letter to Kamala Harris. But I don't think the Democratic Party has the guts to do what the Republican Party does. We're certainly not going to storm the Capitol. But again, I say, Mark, why not count the paper ballots? Let's
yeah.
just count the paper ballots.
Look, the GOP showed up to every court that was open and contested an election that was uncontestable with no evidence. They certainly would have counted the ballots. And all my trolls, my designated trolls on the show, oh my God, Mark off the deep end with the bizarre ballot, Starlink conspiracy, serious, quote, deep state imagination on Mark's part. Mark is signing on to this idea despite what he claims. We're down the conspiracy rabbit hole here. I mean, great. Just count the ballots, dude. I'm not asking you to build a government agency for this. I'm just saying count the ballots. What about this, though? Copper says, but the polls match the votes. It would be different if Harris was way ahead in all the polls. It was within the margin of error, even though we talk about a Trump victory.
Yes, and people don't know this, but the total election was won by Donald Trump by about 232,000 votes.
Right.
So little tiny variations. And honestly, if you're going to do this kind of hacking operation, you're not going to make it too close and you're not going to make it too big. You're going to hit right in that sweet spot so it seems logical and plausible.
Yeah. Agreed. Count the ballots, says Adam. I want peace of mind that it's Americans that are nuts. I do think count the ballots. I don't see what the issue is. But as you say, I guess the issue is that you're up against the clock and Kamala Harris seems to have no desire to go forward with that. I don't get why, but, I'm sure she's licking her wounds on some level, and maybe she feels there's a certain kind of radioactive quality to asking for a recount after having been through 2020. But that said, I just don't see why you roll over for the kind of administration that we're going to have. So I know you're working on several things, Richard Greene. Please mention what they are so people can follow you who have an interest in getting into some of the stuff that you're doing.
I think the reason Donald Trump won, beyond any sort of nefarious activity, there certainly were a lot of people who voted for him based on what I believe is a broken information system in this country. Unfortunately, not every American tunes into the Mark Thompson show. If they did, we would be in a different place. I mean, you're a real journalist. You're giving thoughtful conversation. You're putting out facts that are not disinformation, that are not lies. And so I'm pulling together 50 to 100 influencers, professors, thought leaders to actually crowdsource a new Substack called Project 2026. And of course, I've invited you to do it, where every day we put out actual factual information on issues that are very prone to misinformation and disinformation. So that'll be launching soon. In the meantime, my TikTok at Civics Dean, and I had a TikTok that I did on election night. I was just like, my way of healing, my way of coping is to just communicate things and try to put out ideas. And that's my mom. My mom goes viral more than I do. And I got over 2 million views on an idea, which I still think is a great idea, which is that Joe Biden steps down 2 or 3 or 4 weeks before the end of his term and allows a woman, Kamala Harris, to be the 47th president of the United States. I know it's symbolic. I know it's not deeply
It's a great way to
meaningful,
troll. It's a great way to troll Trump.
And all the merch that says 47 on it, you know, they're going to be out there celebrating Kamala Harris. And I just think that, you know, we don't have a lot to be happy about, but that would be something to be happy about. And, you know, it would be a great thing for Joe Biden to do, add to his legacy, to literally have the first female president. It's like Roger Bannister, right? We didn't think we could break the 4-minute mile, then he did it. We don't think we can have a female president. Let's have that image for my daughter and women across the country of a woman sitting behind the Resolute desk in the Oval Office.
Well, you're getting some support in the chat. I love it. Stay in touch. Please come again. Always enjoy our conversations here and off of this platform as well. So get in touch, Richard, and I'll help you in any way I can. Richard Greene, the Civics Dean, everybody.
Love you, Mark. Thanks.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.